Everyone knew Tony Bennett, the icon, the charming, timeless voice of American music. For over 70 years, he gave the world classic songs and a smile that could warm the coldest room. He wasn't just a living legend, he was a painter, a gentleman, of the old school, admired by the public and revered by his peers. Even Frank Sinatra, a man who didn't hand out praise lightly, once called Tony Bennett the best singer in the business. But behind that legendary smile, a secret war was raging for decades. A bitter, soul-crushing conflict that nearly cost him everything. You see, for his entire career, there was one singer Tony Bennett truly hated, a rival he saw as a profound threat to his talent, his family, and his very life. He believed this person could destroy everything he'd ever built, but this hidden adversary wasn't Frank Sinatra. It wasn't Dean Martin, Perry Como, or even Elvis Presley. The singer he fought so desperately to overcome was a dark, compromised version of himself. This is the story of Tony Bennett's private battle against his own personal demons, the side of him that embraced despair, flirted with destruction, and very nearly silenced one of the greatest voices of all time. This is the untold truth of the man behind the music, and the secret war he fought to become the legend we remember. To understand the singer Tony Bennett grew to despise, you have to first understand the man he always wanted to be. Born Anthony Dominic Benedetto in Astoria, Queens, he grew up in poverty during the Great Depression. His father died when he was only 10, leaving his mother to support the family as a seamstress. From that young age, music and painting were his escape. He saw them not just as a passion, but as a noble calling. He believed an entertainer's job was simple: make people feel good, help them forget their troubles for a little while. That idea became his mantra, a guiding principle shaped by early hardship. He believed in honesty, authenticity, and respecting the audience. He idolized singers like Sinatra, not just for their voices, but for their confidence. He learned early on that the key to a long career was to just be yourself, because that's the one thing nobody else can be. This was the real Tony Bennett, the artist, the idealist, the kid who just wanted to sing the great songs and paint in the afternoons. But another figure was always lurking in the shadows, a ghost born of trauma and temptation. This was the other singer, the man who would emerge during the darkest periods of Bennett's life. This alter ego wasn't a man of principle, he was a man of compromise. He was the voice of fear that whispered about failure. He was the impulse that reached for fleeting trends instead of timeless art. He was the part of Tony that was susceptible to the pressures of fame, the loneliness of the road, and the false promises of addiction. For decades, the world only saw the first man, the smiling crooner who left his heart in San Francisco. But the second man, the hated singer, was always there, just waiting for a moment of weakness. The battle between these two would define Tony's life and push him to the brink. He would later hear about the tragic end of comedian Lenny Bruce, and one phrase would haunt him, a perfect description of what his own dark reflection was capable of. Bruce, he was told, had sinned against his talent. The secret war began long before the fame, in the mud and snow of World War II. In 1944, at just 18 years old, Anthony Benedetto was drafted into the U.S. Army and sent to France as an infantry rifleman, a replacement for units decimated in the Battle of the Bulge. It wasn't an adventure. It was what he would later call a front-row seat in hell. In his autobiography, he described the sheer terror of life on the front lines, the constant fear, the German artillery, the sight of dead soldiers littering the frozen landscape. It was an absolutely terrifying spectacle, he wrote. The experience forged in him a lifelong commitment to pacifism. The main thing I got out of my military experience, he wrote, was the realization that I am completely opposed to war. This trauma laid the first seeds of his internal conflict. But it wasn't just the fighting that scarred him. He also came face to face with prejudice. While serving in the still segregated military, he was demoted from corporal to private simply for inviting a black high school friend to eat with him on Thanksgiving. An officer, a Southern bigot, made an example of him. Bennett was disgusted. "I couldn't get over the fact that they condemned us for just being friends," he later said. That experience hardened his resolve to fight for civil rights. He would later march with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma. But it also deepened the fracture within him. One of his final missions was the liberation of a sub-camp of the Dachau concentration camp network. The horrors he witnessed there were unspeakable. When the war ended, he began singing for the troops under the stage name Joe Barry, trying to reclaim the part of himself the war had tried to extinguish. But the damage was done. The war had taught him that life was fragile and that darkness was real. This internal battleground was where the other singer, the one fueled by fear and despair, first began to take shape. By the 1950s and 60s, Tony Bennett was a superstar. He had a massive hit with I Left My Heart in San Francisco and was winning Grammys. He was the man he had always dreamed of becoming. But then, the music world changed. The British invasion, led by the Beatles, shifted the pop landscape almost overnight. Suddenly, crooners were seen as relics. This is when the hated singer began his hostile takeover. As record sales declined, the pressure mounted. The new president of Columbia Records, Clive Davis, pushed Bennett to record contemporary rock songs to stay relevant. Bennett resisted. He famously disliked most rock and roll, once saying the Rolling Stones promoted juvenile delinquency. But the pressure was immense. The other singer, the voice of compromise, whispered that he had to adapt or die. Reluctantly, Bennett gave in. In 1970, he released Tony Sings the Great Hits of Today. The cover featured him in groovy clothes instead of his signature suit. Inside, he sang Beatles and Stevie Wonder songs. The album was a bomb. It felt inauthentic because it was. It was the work of the other singer, the one who chased trends instead of trusting his gut. The creative clashes with Davis grew more intense. Bennett felt the label was forcing him to betray his principles. Finally, in 1972, after 2 decades, with the label that made him a star, Tony Bennett and Columbia Records parted ways. This was a devastating blow. His career spiraled. He started his own label, Improv, which produced some legendary albums with jazz pianist Bill Evans, but it ultimately folded by 1977. He was left without a recording contract, a manager, or many opportunities outside of Las Vegas. The financial strain was immense. Years of lavish living and poor financial management caught up to him. By the late 1970s, he reportedly owed the IRS as much as $2 million, and they were threatening to seize his home. This was rock bottom. The true artist was in retreat. The hated singer, the one who made bad compromises, mismanaged his life, and was now staring into an abyss of debt and despair, was in complete control. The late 1970s was the darkest period of Tony Bennett's life. His career was in shambles, his finances were a disaster, and his second marriage to actress Sandra Grant was falling apart. To make matters worse, his beloved mother passed away in 1977, leaving him feeling completely adrift. He later described himself as being in a completely self-destructive tailspin. Lost and desperate, he dove into the Hollywood drug scene of the era. In his memoir, he wrote, "Cocaine flowed as freely as champagne, and I soon began joining in the festivities." He admitted to using pills, marijuana, and cocaine to cope with the crushing depression. The fall reached its absolute bottom one night in 1979. His accountants called to inform him that the IRS was officially beginning proceedings to seize his home. The news sent him over the edge. In a fit of despair, he overindulged heavily, then tried to calm himself with a hot bath. He passed out in the tub. In his memoirs, he described having a near-death experience, seeing a golden light that enveloped him in a warm, peaceful glow. But just as he was drifting away, he was jolted back to reality. His wife, Sandra, had come home, found him submerged and not breathing, and pounded on his chest until he was revived. As he was being rushed to the hospital, his mind flashed back to that conversation about Lenny Bruce. The manager's words came back with terrifying clarity. The man sinned against his talent. That sentence hit him like a lightning bolt. Lying in the back of that ambulance, teetering between life and death, Tony Bennett finally understood. The hated singer, the man of compromise, debt, and addiction, had brought him to the very edge. He was throwing away the one precious gift he'd been given. He was sinning against his own talent. That night was the turning point. The shock of nearly dying was so profound that it stopped him cold. The hated singer had made his most powerful move and had almost won. But in losing that battle so spectacularly, Tony Bennett found the strength to finally fight back, and he knew he couldn't do it alone. The first thing he did was make a desperate phone call to the one person he hoped could save him, his son. Tony Bennett's story is a powerful reminder that even our greatest icons face profound struggles. It's a story of resilience, and if you're finding value in this journey, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps us bring you more of these untold stories. Now let's get back to the phone call that sparked one of the greatest comebacks in music history. The day after his overdose, a humbled and terrified Tony Bennett called his sons, Danny and Day, for an emergency meeting. He laid everything bare: the debt, the drugs, the career collapse. He was at his lowest, and in a final act of desperation, he asked his eldest son, Danny, a fledgling musician himself, to be his manager. Danny wasn't a seasoned industry exec. He was in his mid-20s, leading his own rock band. But he had a keen business sense and a fierce loyalty to his father. He accepted the challenge. The first thing Danny did was impose some tough love. He took control of the finances, putting his father on a strict allowance to start chipping away at the massive IRS debt. His strategy for the career was just as radical. He recognized that chasing hits was what had nearly destroyed his father. The hated singer had tried to be something he wasn't. The real Tony Bennett needed to be rediscovered. Danny's plan? Rebuild from the ground up. Instead of booking his father in Vegas casinos, he started booking him in small clubs and college theaters. The goal was to reintroduce Tony Bennett to a new, younger generation, not as a relic, but as a timeless artist. He wanted to market his father to the MTV generation, getting him on shows like Late Night with David Letterman and even a voice role on The Simpsons. It was a slow, deliberate process. They weren't trying to make Tony cool in a trendy way. They were trying to show a new audience that what he did was inherently cool. It was all about authenticity. In 1986, the strategy paid off. Danny negotiated a new contract for his father with his old label, Columbia, the very company that had dropped him 14 years earlier. The resulting album, The Art of Excellence, was Bennett's first record to hit the charts in over a decade. Momentum kept building. Danny booked his father on festivals alongside alternative rock acts like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It was a brilliant, weird move that worked. By 1990, the IRS debt that had almost crushed him was finally paid off. This was the final defeat of the hated singer. The voice of compromise was silenced by the steady, brilliant strategy of his son. The true artist was back on stage, confident in his own identity. The internal war was won, but the greatest victory was yet to come. The peak of this incredible comeback arrived in 1994 in the most unlikely of venues, MTV. The idea of Tony Bennett on the epicenter of youth culture seemed absurd, but it was a stroke of genius. The show was MTV Unplugged, a series celebrating raw musicianship. As Bennett himself joked on the show, "I've been unplugged my whole career." The performance was a revelation. Backed by his classic trio, he didn't change a thing, singing the great American songbook with the same grace and power he always had, joined by younger artists he was now influencing, like Elvis Costello and K.D. Lang. The show was a massive hit. The resulting album, MTV Unplugged, Tony Bennett, went platinum. But the real shock came at the 1995 Grammy Awards. In a field of contemporary superstars, Tony Bennett's live album won the biggest award of the night, Album of the Year. Stepping onto the stage, the 68-year-old was visibly moved. "This is the greatest moment in my life," he said. "It's such a victorious feeling to sing good American music and have this happen." It was more than just an award. It was complete vindication. The singer who had been told to change or disappear had just proven that true artistry is timeless. The victory was absolute. The hated singer was not just defeated, he was erased. In the years that followed, Bennett entered an incredible late career renaissance. Then came a collaboration that would define his final chapter. In 2011, he met pop superstar Lady Gaga. He heard her sing a jazz standard and immediately asked her to record a duet. That duet, "The Lady is a Tramp," sparked a deep friendship and a remarkable musical partnership. Their first album, Cheek to Cheek, introduced his music to yet another generation, but as this final act was unfolding, a new enemy emerged. Around 2016, Tony Bennett was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The family kept it private for years, and Bennett, with his characteristic resolve, insisted on continuing to perform. Singing, after all, had saved his life many times before. It's a cruel disease for anyone, but especially for a singer. Yet, remarkably, the music remained. Even as his cognitive abilities declined, the moment the music started, the true Tony Bennett would reappear. In 2021, he and Lady Gaga recorded their final album, Love for Sale. Later that year, they performed 2 farewell shows at Radio City Music Hall. It was an emotional farewell. Gaga was seen on stage at times guiding her friend, but when he sang, he was as powerful as ever. He went on to break a Guinness World Record, becoming the oldest person to release an album of new material at 95 years old. The battle with Alzheimer's was his final war. But this time, it wasn't against a part of himself. It was a battle to hold on to his core identity. And in the end, he won that war too. The disease could steal his memories, but it could not steal the music. It couldn't touch the essential, artist. Tony Bennett's life was a testament to resilience. The smiling icon the world loved was forged in the fire of a secret decades-long war. The singer he truly hated was the personification of his deepest fears: failure, compromise, and becoming someone he wasn't. His victory over that internal enemy is his true legacy. The comeback, engineered by his son, wasn't just a career revival. It was a soul revival. It was the triumph of authenticity over artifice. Winning Album of the Year for an unplugged performance was the ultimate proof. He didn't need to change for the world. The world just needed to listen. His final years, lived with grace in the face of Alzheimer's, proved that the true artist, the man who believed his job was to bring joy to the audience, could never be fully erased. He was tempted, he stumbled, and he fell. But he fought his way back. He defeated the hateful singer within and reclaimed his soul. His sentiment to his son Danny near the end says it all. Thank you. It was a thank you for saving his career, his finances, and his life. But it was also the sentiment of a man at peace, a warrior who had finally won his secret war, leaving behind nothing but the good life and the beautiful music. What is your favorite Tony Bennett song or memory? Share it with us in the comments below. His music touched generations, and we'd love to hear how it touched you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for watching.